say by your recollection?
Let me tell you what it does say, and it is, as I say, it was not made by me, but it was made by his regulator. McCain, at the beginning of the meeting, one of our jobs as elected officials is to help constituents. By the regulator, unbeknownst to us, it was clearly a tape recording.
What does that transcript say by your recollection?
Let me tell you what it does say, and it is, as I say, it was not made by me, but it was made by his regulator. McCain, at the beginning of the meeting, one of our jobs as elected officials is to help constituents in a proper fashion. ACC, that's American Continental, is a big employer and important to the local economy. I wouldn't want any special favors for them. Then I go on, I don't want any part of our conversation to be improper. We asked Chairman Gray about that, I'm referring to the last meeting, and he said it wasn't improper to discuss Lincoln, etc. Now, I received, before I went to that meeting, two important pieces of information. One, an Alan Greenspan study which said that Lincoln Continental was a strong, important, viable institution that would be important to the economy of California, Arizona. That was by Alan Greenspan. They also received a study by Arthur Young, one of the big 8 accountants, that said that it was the longest investigation in history, that the investigators, the regulators were hostile to Lincoln Savings and Loan, etc. There was at least enough information for me to ask if Lincoln Savings and Loan was being fairly or unfairly treated. Not to seek any special favors, as I said in that statement, but to see if they were fairly or unfairly treated. At that meeting, I was assured that they were being fairly treated. At that time, I ceased all involvement with Lincoln Savings and Loan. I never called anyone, nor did any intervention in their behalf. Let me just add one other thing. Mr. Adams, who was there, will allege that somehow that meeting caused the delay in the takeover of Lincoln Savings. Following that meeting, a couple months later, those same regulators recommended the takeover of Lincoln Savings by the government. Obviously, they were not swayed in their view by the meeting. That was passed on to Mr. Gray, who I understand was leaving office at that time, and passed it on to his successor. It was his successor, who I have never met nor never ever corresponded to, who changed the jurisdiction from San Francisco to elsewhere, which then caused a reinvestigation and thereby the delay. I have not seen one shred of evidence that the meetings that we had caused any delay. In fact, you will find from reading the transcript of the second meeting that most of the senators, and I only speak for myself, were curious as to why the investigation had gone on as long as it did and had not been resolved one way or the other.
Edward Gray, how were you impressed by these comments of Senator McCain of Arizona?
Well, that's absolutely right. It didn't affect me, the fact that he had either the first or my regulators had the second.
What's the main point here?
The main point is that Senator DeConcini, and I heard no objections in the meeting from any of the other senators.
Meeting 1, April the 2nd.
Yes. Senator DeConcini asked me to withdraw the regulation, and in turn he said they would get their friend to make more home loans. By the way, this is somewhat corroborated by a memorandum that was given to Senator DeConcini several weeks before that meeting, and which Senator DeConcini told the news reporter of the Arizona Republic that he had on his lap at the time of the meeting. This memorandum, written by one Lori Stadelmeyer of DeConcini's office, said, these are the things we want from Gray, and these are the things that Lincoln will do.
All right, we're going to take a break here in a matter of seconds, but I want to make clear what my producer told me, who had the telephone call this morning with Senator Cranston's press secretary. Apparently, Senator Cranston's memory of DeConcini's central point in both meetings was obscure or vague. But having been presented with the manuscript, he then reconstructed the words that I read during the first segment of this program. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Adams, if you'd care to put a question to Senator McCain that he can think about during the break that we're going to take in 25 seconds.
At the April 9th meeting, you were told by the regulators they were bringing a criminal referral against Lincoln for fraud. Why did you do nothing for the next 2 years to make sure that this fraud case was investigated, since it involved property, money, and jobs in Arizona?
Now, you can reflect on your answer for that. We're giving you a break, John McCain. You're a war hero, and you deserve it. But we want to hear from you, and when we come back, we'll be right back. James Ring Adams, would you please re-put your question in hard focus so that we can get an answer from Senator McCain?
At the April 9th meeting, you were told by the regulators from San Francisco they were bringing a criminal referral against Lincoln and Charles Keating. Why did you not pursue this matter over the next 2 years, since it involved jobs, money, and investments in Arizona?
Because, first of all, as Mr. Black said in the meeting, he said, Glenn said, you haven't told them, according to hadn't told Lincoln, saying, no, justice would skin us alive if we did. Those referrals are very confidential. Those referrals are confidential, and if I had said anything publicly about those referrals, I would have risked leaking or warning someone who may be in the subject of prosecution.
Were you concerned that nothing was done for 2 years?
The Justice Department and the regulators were doing their job and were seeing that it was being carried out.
Did you wonder what happened to the case?
I had no reason to believe that they weren't.
James?
Did you wonder what happened to the case over the next 2 years?
Of course I wondered. I also was assured time and again that the regulators were doing their jobs and that the Justice Department was doing their job as well. I had no reason to believe that that was not the case. If I had publicly or done anything, frankly, I would have betrayed the confidence of the regulators who told us that at the meeting.
Who was giving you those reassurances? This is interesting.
I'm reassured, I am assured that the Justice Department was doing their job, and I had no reason to believe they weren't.
Were you talking to people?
Senator McCain,
I did not talk to anyone. I am sure that the Justice Department did their job. I'm sure they're doing their job.
Senator McCain,
I have no reason to believe they wouldn't. It would have been improper for me. Mr. Adams talks a lot about improper behavior. It certainly would have been improper for me to say anything publicly about something that was told me in strictest confidentiality when I had no reason to believe they weren't doing their job.
Senator McCain, how much did you receive from Charles Keating?
Approximately $112,000, depending on whose numbers you believe, over 3 campaigns, $50,000 roughly in the 1986 Senate campaign, of which $2.3 million were raised. And I want to reemphasize to you again, John, if I had been presented with this information about anyone, whether they had contributed to me or one of my opponents, I would have at least asked the regulators or the governing body whether that person was fairly or unfairly treated, which is exactly what I said in the transcript of that meeting. And after I was assured of that, I had no further involvement in the case whatsoever. Let me also respond a little bit to Mr. Gray's comment that because I didn't say anything, therefore I was agreement with Mr. DeConcini. It is now known that a couple of weeks, it is clear, a week before the first meeting with Mr. Gray, Mr. Keating approached me and asked me to do basically what I thought was improper. At that time, I told him I would not do that. It doesn't make sense that I would be a party to something like that in a meeting after I had told Mr. Keating that I wouldn't do such a thing.
Did you return?
Second of all, senators speak for themselves, and to assume that by silence someone is in agreement with what one senator out of 4 said, I think is frankly not appropriate.
Did you return $13,000 to Mr. Keating?
No, I reimbursed for some flights that I took on Mr. Keating's aircraft, which was brought to my attention by the tax people at American Continental, which I reimbursed, and then later the media was informed of the fact that I was late in reimbursement. I've since found 3 checks that I wrote to pay for part of those trips.
Where did he fly you to?
To the Bahamas. Excuse me, to Miami, and then we took a commercial flight over to the Bahamas.
And you stayed at his place in the Bahamas?
Yes, I did. He was a friend of mine.
Was your wife involved with Mr. Keating?
My wife was with me.
Was your wife involved in a business-wide capacity with her father, with Mr. Keating?
My father went into a limited partnership in a shopping center of which there were some 12 other investors, a limited partnership, straight-up investment into a shopping center, which I think which was fully disclosed on my financial disclosure statement for 3 years.
What was the extent of their equity?
$390,000, approximately 12, I understand 12% of the shopping center.
$395,000. Does
Yes.
the big question that it seems to me your constituents are going to face you with is, why do you have this extraordinary interest, if it is extraordinary, in an S&L institution which is headquartered in Irvine, California? And is it possible that your interest derives from the largesse of Mr. Keating? And if so, is that all proper? What's your big answer?
Mr. Keating, before I was in politics, we became friends before then. After his company, which was moved from Cincinnati, was based in Phoenix, Arizona. There was a couple of thousand employees. He was a major economic factor in my state, as other institutions are. And I would go, I say again and again, especially since it's clear in the transcript, I sought no special favors. And I would go with that same information to ask a regulatory or a governing body to assure me that they were being fairly treated, no matter who they were, as I have done on many, many, many occasions. I would like to ask Mr. Adams whatever evidence he has that that meeting in any way delayed the takeover of Lincoln Savings and Loan.
Well, Senator McCain, your former governor, Bruce Babbitt, says that what you and the other senators did was the equivalent of going to a judge to fix a case involving the son of a friend, a traffic ticket or a drug conviction.
Yes, he did that.
That's Mr. Babbitt's impression.
And in my view, he's very naive in that statement, because I can tell you time after time after time, like, for example, flights over the Grand Canyon, where I intervened with the Federal Aviation Authority, like a dam that there's too heavy releases from into the Grand Canyon, that I intervened with a regulatory authority to try and see that that damage was stopped. The job of an elected representative is to represent the people that elect him and that live and work in his state, and I will continue,
Were
as
you
all
aware
of us do,
that the
to try and represent
examination
them to see that they are fairly treated only.
Does that mean that you would do the same thing all over again?
I would not go to a meeting with 5 senators. Obviously, I was very worried about the appearance of that meeting at the time. And by the way, you know, Mr. Gray, I'm sorry he didn't seek the opportunity to say that I was a decent and honorable man, which he did say in the Arizona Republic a few months ago, because I think, frankly, that that's a bit important in this scenario. But back to
well, hold on, Senator.
I would help a person who comes to me with evidence that they are being unfairly treated, only to see that they're fairly treated.
Senator McCain, let's find out if he still feels that way about you. Is that a fair characterization on your part of what you think of Senator McCain?
Yeah, I think of course I think he's a decent and honorable man. I think he made a mistake here. And let me say about...
because he was at the meeting.
Well, he made a mistake, yes. And I mean, at least after the second meeting, he did nothing more.
Does the question arise, too, of if he was at the first meeting and he felt uncomfortable, why did he go to the second meeting?
Let me give you one answer to that, because I asked Chairman Gray if it would be proper or improper to meet with these people. That's also part of the transcript.
Did he so ask you?
I got several questions. Is there anything improper in what we're doing? And I said it is not improper for a United States Senator to ask questions. And I don't think it's improper. I think the whole environment there was, very questionable. But you did not raise any objections. That's all I said. And I have also pointed out that you told me you didn't recall the presentation or the proposal in the first meeting, but when we talked on the telephone, you immediately brought to my attention the DeConcini proposal in the second meeting, which was virtually the same as the DeConcini proposal to me in the first meeting. And you were honest enough to say you couldn't remember the first one, but you pointed out that it was done in the second one. Is that right?
Absolutely. The transcript is clear of the second meeting, which was taped by your regulator, and not by any of us, and clearly the people can draw their own conclusions from the second transcript. At the beginning of the first meeting, Mr. Gray said he had no involvement with the case because it was being handled by the San Francisco regulators, and that they would be made available to meet with us. With that, I lost interest in the meeting because I was there to discuss whether Lincoln Savings and Loan was being fairly treated or not, and therefore I frankly do not recollect the conversation, nor do I think it's illogical to assume why I wouldn't.
Paul Muolo wants to put a question to you, Senator.
Sure. Senator, so far in all this 5 senators meeting and all that, 2 of the senators have given back the campaign money that Mr. Keating and his employees at ACC have given back.
Which 2 of those? Which 2?
Senators Regal and his co-senator DeConcini. You have $112,000, $125,000 in contributions. The $13,000 you already paid back. and there's the partnership with your wife. I have a two-tiered question here. Do you plan on giving any of the money back? And second of all, in lieu of all the financial connections between Mr. Keating and yourself, do you think you would have been at that meeting in the first place if none of the money had ever been given to you?
Of course I would, and of course your statement is disingenuous at best. I have no financial tie with Mr. Keating. My
$125,000 isn't a financial
tie? Made an investment which my wife is part ownership of the company. As I said, it's a straight up and down investment which was part of my financial disclosure statement. As far as the contributions are concerned, I have asked for a full investigation by the Federal Elections Commission, and if they determine that those contributions are illegal, I will dispense with them. Maybe not necessarily give them back to people who donated or gave them illegally, but perhaps to some bondholders or some other method of giving them back. So your statement is false about my, quote, financial ties. The $13,000 was a reimbursement for flights that I took on his airplane, not any kind of contribution, political contribution.
Senator, after it was revealed about after you took the flights, how many years later did you finally repay that money?
I repaid 3 of the flights, basically at the time of the 9 trips. I thought we had, as I've said, it was a serious mistake on my part not to reimburse, and then it was in March of 1989, some 3 years later, that I was informed that they had not been paid by the tax person at American Continental. At that time, I made immediate steps to reimburse, notified the ethics committees. The House Ethics Committee notified me in return that I had taken the appropriate steps and need take no further action.
Senator, let me ask you this. Do you think that there are other Lincoln savings and loans out there?
I know nothing about the business. I have no way of knowing, but except what I read in the media, I draw the same conclusions that you do. But I will say to you, I made a mistake because the meeting of 5 senators was wrong. The late reimbursement is a serious mistake. I promised the people of Arizona that I didn't promise them I wouldn't make mistakes, but I did promise them I would not abuse my office, and I have not abused my office.
Common Cause has suggested a Justice Department probe. Would you welcome such a probe?
Absolutely, and we have written the Justice Department telling of our willingness and desire to cooperate.
If you are subpoenaed...
By the way, we didn't get an answer from Mr. Adams how the meeting delayed the takeover of Lincoln Savings and Loan.
Well, I'd be delighted. What do you think the impact was on Danny Wald, who was the member of the Senate Banking Committee? He was on the Senate Banking Committee at the time, well aware of what the senators were thinking.
He had nothing to do with it at the time. He didn't even know the meeting took place.
You don't think so?
And it was recommended by the regulators we met with that the takeover take place of Lincoln.
Ed, did you tell him about the meeting? Did you tell Danny about the meeting that had taken place when he took over?
I suspect I did. I don't recall, but I told him, I tried to keep him abreast of what I knew about the case with Lincoln.
Senator,
because Mr. Muolo was told about the meeting, therefore that means that he delayed